7 ways to be heard by men. If you have the experience that you're not being heard by men or a particular man, this video will help you. And if you stay until the end, I'm also going to throw in a bonus 8th thing that you can do. And by the way, if you're a woman that dates men and you're stuck on a guy that is not fully available to you, or you're dating someone that's in a relationship with someone else, or there's some kind of complication, click the first link beneath this video. You're also welcome to apply for one-on-one support or to be part of my group program. First link beneath this video. All right, let's get today into this topic. I've got 7 things that I want to share with you. And without further ado, let's get into number 1. So the first thing that you can do to be heard by men is to actually not have the expectation that the guy is going to value your feelings. Now, this is kind of controversial territory, so let me stake out what I'm actually saying here. I'm not saying that your feelings don't matter. I'm not saying that some men won't value feelings. Some men do. I'm not saying that men can't learn how to value feelings. If they don't, they can learn some of that stuff. But if you've been on this channel, you'll know, like, we start ideally with this love of reality, right? Meaning we love what is. So if we don't have an expectation that the guy is going to value how we feel, it might be easier to be less hurt and wounded when that's not the case. Now, I'm not saying it's not going to be the case. I'm just saying when that's not the case. And by the way, for many men, just to get blunt with it, they're not going to value your feelings as much as you do. And by the way, they're not going to value their feelings as much either, right? Meaning in their kind of hierarchy of values, if you will, there are other things that they are paying attention to, right? Which could be reason, logic. It could be what's actionable. It could be what a solution is. It could just be other things than feelings. Now, again, I'm not saying that you're someone who overvalues your feelings. You may not even place that much value on your feelings. I'm just saying that it's easiest to not feel heard when you go in imagining this person should value what I feel. And then when they don't, you feel activated, perhaps you feel triggered, perhaps you start to shut down, perhaps you start to act out, right? We're trying to take you off that conveyor belt and start you in a place of more sobriety. The more sober you are about this, the less pain it's going to cause you. I'll give you a very, very different example in case this helps, right? Sometimes in the West, we have this presupposition, which means this kind of preformed idea that people should value democracy, right? And you and I know, if you look around the world, there's plenty of dictators that don't value democracy. It doesn't help us in conversation with those people to imagine that they should value democracy. It's easier to start with, well, where are you actually at? Now, I'm not comparing men to dictators around the world. I'm just saying you can learn to notice what is in front of you and start there, right? So you having a presupposition that he should value your feelings in the way that you do is probably a presupposition that's going to lead you to false thinking and ultimately to pain and suffering. Now, by the way, if you have tried this and you have a guy that just never and will never through time value how you feel and that doesn't work for you, you have the right to say, look, this doesn't work for me. But I'm imagining as you're watching this that either you may have had this experience with more than one man, or you may be dating or relating with a guy that you actually want to have in your life, right? So we're trying to get you more of what you want. So let's just start with being as close to reality as you have observed it. Number 2 builds on this. The more you are feeling hurt, the more emotional you are likely to be. Now, at best, the guy may hear the emotion underneath this and address it, right? Notice that you're feeling afraid, right? Or notice that you're feeling disappointed and sad. And he may address that. But oftentimes we won't. Oftentimes we're either not going to track what that underlying emotion is, or even if we do, we might not see it as our job to assuage that emotion or to soothe that emotion. We might see our job as something else, like what's the point of the conversation? Like, what are we trying to get to? What are we trying to do? What are we trying to decide? So again, this is just a little bit of a sobriety piece up front. You may sometimes need to know when to step out of a conversation rather than continue in the conversation that's going to hurt and wound you more. Right? Said differently, if you are already experiencing a certain level of activation, it might be better for you to cut your losses and to come back to that conversation at a different time, right? Perhaps when you're more resourced or he's more resourced or there's more availability or there's something, it's just a different time, different day, different weather, whatever it is that just allows us to be in a better connection about the thing that you're wanting to feel heard on, right? So sometimes you need to be sober, even though part of you is pain to feel more heard. You have to be sober. If you're not feeling heard, sometimes pushing down that track, it just ends up hurting you more, and then you're deepening the wound, right? I'm saying you may have a wound in this territory, you may not, but many of us do. I can relate to having a wound in this territory. So we're not trying to deepen the wound by doing something that's not actually going to fulfill it in the first place. All right, number 3, super practical thing, pick a time and a place that is most conducive to being heard, right? So it's hard for a guy to hear you if he's engaged in an activity, right? If he's driving, or even if he's watching his favorite sports on the TV, right? Or he's doing something around the garden, or he's taking care of business in some way. Or even if he's taking care of a lot of business and now he's kind of in rest mode, he still may not be available for a conversation, right? So this is where you have to get good at reading and understanding him. Perhaps you've noticed in the past that he's most available, after he's had an hour or two on his own, right? Or after he's had a beer and has kicked back, or he's most available when you guys are out on a hike, but not even when you're hiking, actually when you're sat down and looking out at the view, right? Or when he's completely stopped. Or maybe you've noticed he's most available actually when everything is done for the day, the kids are in bed, or he's taking care of whatever he wants in the evening, he's had a little bit of time to chill. Then is actually when he's available, right? Maybe it's super late at night. Maybe it's super early in the morning, right? Whatever the idiosyncrasies are, that you are paying attention to that. And if this is something important enough that you need to be heard on it, and you notice that is really important to you, that you might schedule a time to say, hey, nothing to worry about. Just there's some stuff that's important to me that I want to be able to talk to you about, and I want to be able to do it in a way that we can both just be there present for the conversation. So I'm wondering if there's a good time to do that. And you get his buy-in on the front end. Now, if you're not going to do it as kind of formally and scheduled as that, what you might just want to do is notice, do you have his full attention? And be consistent on your side of the fence that if you don't have his full attention, that you stop. Either until you have his full attention, right? So maybe you're sat down on the couch and you thought that it was a good time and you start talking about something, but you notice his attention isn't with you. So rather than try and talk against that or do something, perform better, talk louder, yada, yada, just stop and notice if his attention comes to you. And if it doesn't, maybe you can just say, hey, I'm wondering if I can have your attention fully. Now, he might not be a yes to that. He might be like, oh my gosh, you want to talk? I'm so stressed about this contract. Or, okay, then, you can do with that information what you want to. You can either say, well, okay, I do need to talk to you at some point. So if this isn't a good time, can you suggest when would be? Right? Or maybe if there's some immediate concern he has, like, oh yeah, I've got to put the trash out and I keep forgetting it. Like, let him go put the trash out and, regroup in 5 minutes. But we're basically inviting you to take ownership of, do you have his full attention? Now, one of the areas where this might be particularly relevant, if you are an extroverted thinker, right? You're someone who does your best thinking when you're talking out loud. It might not be clear to him whether you are doing that, whether you're kind of, thinking out loud, talking about something, and or whether it's actually like, hey, there's a real thing that I need to connect to you about. Right? So again, this is about being sober. If you have that tendency to talk, or maybe you are the more talkative person in the connection, you need to make sure that he realizes, hey, there's different types of talk, right? There's maybe just, I'm talking, I'm riffing, but this is actually, I want to sit down and really talk to you about something. So you might need to make that clear to him. Now, the fourth thing that can help if you do sit down for this kind of conversation is don't let him interrupt you, right? Maybe he has a tendency to interrupt you. And the best way to deal with this is just to say, let me finish. I haven't finished yet. Right? It's to kind of insist on your right to talk, or to not cede territory, to keep talking. And I guess the distinction here is between interruptions that build and interruptions that don't. Right? So if he's interrupting you to say, oh yeah, or I get it, or tell me more about that. Okay, that's an interruption that's kind of building, right? He's with you in the conversation. So I'd probably go with that. Now, if you know that there's something that's so heavy on your heart and sensitive that what you actually need is completely uninterrupted time, then you're going to have to frame that up front, right? I got some stuff to share. Would you be willing to literally say nothing for, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And then the challenge on you is probably to get to the essence of it, right? So guys generally aren't going to need every blow by blow and the backstory, right? Sometimes we do this in coaching. You might have to bottom line yourself and get as quickly as you can to the heart of the matter, right? Not the dramatic tension build up, but actually just what is the main thing here and what is maybe the main thing you're asking for. But don't let him interrupt you, and particularly don't let him interrupt you if what he's interrupting you is not in, from your perspective, building on the conversation, right? Or it starts down some other track, or it's kind of a tributary, so it's not unrelated, but really we need to stay in the main channel of the river, right? So you can say, hey, hold that thought. We'll get to it. Just let me finish. I want to get this out. Now, if you do that and you insist, and he cannot but keep interrupting you, you may have to say, I notice this isn't working for me. Perhaps we can do this differently, right? I'm looking for some uninterrupted time. Could you do that with me? So you might loop back to the frame, right? If the frame was, I need uninterrupted time, and he's not doing it, hold him to the frame. I mean, if he can literally never, ever do this, you might struggle to be heard by this person. But I think even people who are prone to interrupting or who have a lot to say, if you can make it really clear and simple and not talk when you don't have their attention, and when you do get to the heart of the matter, you might find that you have more of an experience of being heard. All right, number 5 is imagine that he feels afraid if things are grounded on sand and not rock, right? So this is me just giving you a metaphor as to sometimes why there are things that guys don't care about. So in this instance, maybe he doesn't care about your feelings, and that often includes his own feelings, right? So I'm going to say most guys, I think, are consistent in this. I don't think they super value their own feelings and then super discount other people's feelings. I think typically they have a broadly similar view of feelings, whoever is doing the feelings. But let's just imagine in his world that feels like trying to build a house without foundation, like trying to make decisions based upon what he might see as transient, fleeting feelings. To him, that's kind of like building a house on sand rather than stone, right? It's building a house without foundation. So that's actually difficult for him. Maybe it makes him feel afraid, right? So that's not the only way to orient to feelings, right? Our authentic feelings can be really true messengers of our experience, but it might give you a little bit of perspective to compare, are the feelings that you're talking about right now, are they more weather or are they more climate? Right? Are they more weather in the sense that, hey, this is here in this moment and it changes in the next? Now, I'm not discounting that. I'm just saying he might have a harder time valuing that than climate, right? Meaning if this is something that you have felt for a long time, right? Like every time we get together with, that friend or your family, there's a thing that happens for me that doesn't feel good and I need to explore that with you. That's perhaps different than, maybe today I feel super stressed and there's this thing that's really on my mind, but honestly, maybe tomorrow if I'm not stressed, it might not be on my mind, right? Now, I'm still not saying don't explore it. I'm just saying you might hold it a little bit differently, and you might learn how to care most about being heard about climate, and you may cut him a little bit more slack about the weather, because it might be hard for him to find the weather as important or as engaging. That's why I'm kind of using this metaphor of it's sort of stuff on sand, because for him it might seem like, well, if we were talking tomorrow, it would be something very different. So notice, how long has this been a thing for you, and maybe bring the stuff that is more consistent through time. Number 6, discern when he's looking to win the argument or if there's something deeper that he's fighting for, right? So if you're not feeling heard because he kind of gets into debate mode with you, and that perhaps feels invalidating to you, and I get why that might feel invalidating to you because he's perhaps missing the point. But notice if there's something that he's actually fighting for. I mean, it could be what seems true to him, right? It could be fighting for some values that he has, even if he hasn't named those values. It could be he's fighting for his identity. It could be that he's fighting for a sense of safety. So sometimes you have to listen that level deeper, right? Most men won't go into an argument and say, well, in order for me to feel safe, I need to have ABC. But they may argue over the top of a lot of things, but really the detail is obscuring, though actually what they want to feel is a sense of safety. And perhaps the different values that you're bringing in the conversation isn't having him feel safe. So part of your skillfulness is noticing, is he debating me for debating's sake? A lot of us as guys, we like debating, right? Not just guys, but in this instance, we're talking about guys, right? We might think that, that's what we do when we get together with our guy friends. We kind of pick a topic and we go debating about it, right? That might not be what you need, because you're not looking to be debated. You might be looking for dialogue, but you might principally be looking just to be received. but that may not be, on his initial, menu of options. There's not one called, how can I receive you, right? There might be like, how can I fix it? How can I win the argument? How can we find out what's logical and reasonable? But there might not be something called, how can I receive what you're saying? So again, none of this is about you having to let go of what you need. It's just saying, is there anything that you can reflect back to him that is actually also you hearing him, right? Sometimes when we most have a need to be heard, it's really difficult to hear the other person. Now, maybe you're the 180 this. Maybe you spend all your time hearing people and you're so connected and empathetic and tuned into other people that actually there's no issue with you hearing them, But it is difficult for most of us to hear ways of being and values that we don't relate with, right? So let's just say, for instance, that you have a much more value on what you feel and he has much more value on, quote, what he thinks is, a consistent, reasonable, logical argument. It might be hard for you to fully hear him on that stuff because the moment he starts that way, you might go into your own activation. Well, oh, here he goes again with his logic and he's not going to hear me. That might be so loud in your experience, it's difficult to put it down. So, part of this is what we call increasing values metabolism. Fancy phrase, basically means learning how to value other things. He would do well maybe to value some of the things that you value, and you might get closer to them if you could also value the things that he values. It's this sort of weird thing because then it allows you to internalize them. And so it effectively reduces the activation or the kind of polarization between you. If you're able to say, oh yeah, I get why he's going into his logic right now. I don't need to reject that. I might just want to redirect the conversation towards, yeah, I super hear that. And right now, I just need you for 1 minute. I'm not actually looking for a response. I'm just looking to be heard, Now, number 7 is sort of simple human psychology. Number 7 is reward him for what it is that you want, right? So if he does hear you or even is in any way closer to hearing you in a way that would feel good to you, super reward him for that, right? Make a point of mentioning it at the time and make a point of mentioning it at subsequent time. And if you even want to, pour more gasoline on this, mark it in some more, noticeable or ritualized way, right? You're going out, say, hey, I want to get you a coffee because I want to thank you for the way that you heard me on the weekend or yesterday or when we were talking about that difficult thing. So you're starting to reinforce him like, oh, this does matter to you. This is a real thing. Sometimes as a guy, it may be difficult for him to know what is the thing that you really value, because it might seem to him that if you're someone that feels a lot more than he feels, that it's almost so confusing and complex, that world. He doesn't quite know when it's really meaningful to you, when it's not, what really mattered, what didn't. It might just seem a little bit like, I'm trying to think of the right analogy. I don't know if you're good at languages, but it's hard to learn languages. You're sitting in the classroom and there's all, I remember this with Italian and all this Italian being spoken. It's hard for me really to distinguish what's even going on. I don't really know what's going on. I think often as guys, if we really slowed down and just narrated our experience, we'd either realize we don't really know what's going on, or we kind of have an idea of what we think is or should be going on, but it might not be that connected to the reality, at least of your experience, right? So this is saying, yeah, you're in a way, you're giving yourself permission to train him, right? Now, some people don't like that. You train a dog, you don't train a guy, but in whatever word you use, whether it's praise, appreciation, positive reinforcement would be the more psychological term, letting people know, we all train each other, we all influence each other in subtle and gross ways all the time. So why not just put a little bit more high definition on this? All right, so in at number 8 is my bonus. Thank you for staying here this long. So my bonus is really, it's an inquiry for you. So number 8 is, are you being heard elsewhere? Are you being heard elsewhere? Is this a specific issue with this man? Is this more an issue with men generally, or is this more an issue with you being heard generally? And it might not fall discreetly in one of those categories, but I'm just inviting you to notice which flavor is most true to you, because it could be that you have some wounding in this territory called being heard, right? I certainly know that's been true for me. So if you have some wounding in the territory called not being heard, you might learn how to cut him more slack because you realize, okay, I'm super sensitive in this territory. So I got to own some of that sensitivity, right? Now, I'm not going to just give him permission to keep wounding me in that territory, but I do want to notice, it's easy for me to get activated here. This is a sensitive subject for me. And if we replaced him with another guy, it would still be a sensitive subject. When you own that, you might develop more sobriety about how to continue to nourish and heal that wound, right? So said differently, if you have a wound in the territory called not being heard, and if you are relating or dating a guy who's not that good at hearing you, at least in your experience, this is going to be tricky territory. You might just have to be sober about that. It might not be easy for you to heal this territory with this guy. Now, that might mean that, this is a bit of a non-starter, because actually this is going to just entrench the wound, right? It might be that you get sober. Okay, the place I'm most going to be working this, at least initially, is not so much with him, or at least I'm opening up another front, right? I'm going to work on this with a coach or a therapist, or I'm going to be part of some kind of community of learning that's going to help me with this wound. Life isn't always convenient, right? Meaning sometimes what does life do? It presents you with the circumstances. It's almost like if you're a computer game, it puts the big boss right in front of you at the beginning, rather than building up through all the levels. And then eventually, okay, we've mastered our skills and now we get to slay the dragon. Sometimes life says, oh, okay, you've got this wound here. Let's put someone who's actually going to really wiggle in this wound, right? So you don't get away with not being able to look at this wound, right? Now that's difficult. That's sometimes a hard path of learning. But just because the person is fully activating that wound for you, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can heal that wound with them. You're probably going to need to look in some other places. And you may eventually, if you take the computer game analogy, if you've done a lot of work elsewhere, you may now finally be able to slay this dragon, right? Which means that you may have much less activation in the territory called I'm not being heard. You may be sober and notice, I'm not really being heard. But rather than it spiral you into your wound, you may be able to stay in your center and ask for what you need. Like, hey, I really need to be heard on this. So I'm curious, are you available for that? Or you might be able to get specific with your request. Look, I know it's a busy time. I literally just need 5 minutes. I'm going to bottom line get right to the point. Which again, if you can say that to a guy, you're probably going to ease his system, right? What do we fear as guys? We fear that you're going to talk at length, and it's probably not going to make too much sense to us. And at the end, we're not even sure whether it was worth it, right? That's probably the fear, at least unconsciously in most of us as guys. It's not that we don't care. It's that we want to be useful, right? So part of you training him in all this could actually be that you're getting him to realize he's being useful when he just listens and receives what you're saying. But you may need to keep framing him up front. Hey, I just need you to listen. I don't need a solution. I don't need feedback. I just want you to listen. And that might be bizarre to him, right? That might be like imagining he's a sportsman, right? He's like a I play soccer. He's a goal-scoring striker. And now you're trying to say that it's really valuable if he just sits on the bench. That's how it might occur to him. Like, I spent my whole time out on the pitch, mastering my skills, scoring goals. And now you're saying to me that the most valuable thing I can do is just sit on the bench and kind of wait it out or listen. So that might be really countercultural to him. So, bear that in mind. But bear in mind, if you've got wounding in this territory, it's probably going to take a village, right? It's probably going to take more places that you get some support and you get to work this. And it might just allow you, even if he is, quote, activating or hurting you in what you perceive as his insensitivity. If you realize I've got a heightened sensitivity and wound, you might just cut him a little bit of slack. Like, even the most attuned person at times may activate your wound. Now, it could be that you need a more sensitive, attuned person. That might be part of what's true for this. But generally, as we start to relax the wound, and sometimes it does take a relational partner to heal it as well. So if you can find someone that can work on this with you, all the power to you. But sometimes you call in the relationship that's not going to allow you to heal it with that person, but it gives you the wake-up call. Like, oh, yeah, I've got some big wounding in this territory. Or let's say perhaps you never felt heard by one of your parents. Maybe never felt heard by dad. And that is getting picked up in every relationship that you come into contact with. So you might have to do some healing. Sometimes you can do your healing in relationship. Sometimes you do it without relationship, right? You use the relationship to say, oh, okay, there's a thing. I keep winding this same pattern up. Let me actually disconnect from that and go do some work on myself, right? Now, your past will have its uniqueness. You'll probably know intuitively inside if you tune in what is right for you, right? Can you do this with someone? Can you not? My imagination is that for a lot of us, there's a stage of development where actually we come into connections and relationships in order to heal a bunch of stuff, right? That it's almost like we can't get away with the old pattern, which is that stuff is mostly going to stay in the background and mostly just stay there. It's actually like life is wanting us to evolve. So we're going to heal some stuff. You know, I'm not sure if our grandparents, most of them were probably in survival mode. They probably weren't super thinking about healing. Maybe they were if you were, you know, in a part of the world where that was a thing. But you get my point. From most of our ancestry, we weren't healing wounds, right? We were dealing with the practicalities of survival. Now, many of us, a lot of the time, we're still dealing with the practicalities of survival. So I'm not missing that either. But do you get what I'm saying? That you might have been looking at your relationships through the lens of, you know, well, why can't I just find a relationship that works for me, right? That probably is your deepest desire. But it could be that you're also in a stage of development where life is going to say, well, if we constellate a relationship around this big wound, it's probably not going to be the healing that you want in this lifetime. So we're going to give you some connections that activate it, that really have you pay attention. Oh, I've got a wound in this territory called being heard. And so historically, I would have solved that unconsciously by finding a partner that doesn't hear me, that just confirms that I'm not worthy of being heard, and I would have put up with it. But that's not going to, you know, it's not going to go now. What's going to go now is, oh, I know I have an issue around being heard. How can I heal that? I don't want to just pretend that that's not the case. I want to approach it directly. And it might be that life brings in the connection that just activates that for you, where you see it so clearly, and then you go to work on it, right? So it's also cutting you some slack that this connection in front of you may be something you can work with, it maybe not. Let's find out. But if it's more that it's the catalyst rather than the cure, maybe that's okay. And maybe you can go work on some of your own healing. And then in the future, this may always be a slight sensitivity, but we can reduce it, right? I've had this with gluten, where it's so sensitive that, you know, I smell it in the air and I'm having a reaction to it. But I've also had the experience through time of desensitizing that and it being less of an issue. You may find it's a similar thing with this being heard. So finally, I just want to say thank you. If you've made it to this part of the video, I super appreciate your attention. I hope these 7 plus bonus 1 things have been useful for you. If you want my help, click the first link beneath this video. Let's get you some support. If you are a third wheel in a connection, if you're dating someone that's in another relationship, if you are stuck on someone and you know that you need to move on, I can help you do those things. Click that link and let's be in touch and get you some support. And as always, I'm Jack. Thanks for being here.